Monday Morning Messy Moto is back, and today we're making sure the pistons, cylinders, and rings are within specification. Checking the pistons, cylinders, and rings is essential because it ensures the engine will create the correct amount of pressure to keep the combustion process in the cylinder head, allowing it to exit the exhaust valves. We shouldn't have too many surprises since we will reuse the cylinders and heads from our 2006 18,000-mile engine. Everything for the top end should be ready to use except the opening and closing shims. We will have to order the kit from Ducati Rent-A-Tool before we take on that project. It's package day in the Messy Moto garage. We finally got the Ducati 749 timing tool, which will allow us to perform the maintenance required to the timing system when we put the heads back on the engine. The heads are the shiny machine parts just behind me. These tools will allow us to set the timing belts on the camshafts to the exact timing needed for the specific engine. That means one set of valves will always be open and one set will always be closed at the correct time. This is vital to the engine working properly. The Ducati 749 Testastretta engine is a free-running engine, which means the valves do not come in contact with the pistons, but will travel into the cylinder area. If the bike is timed incorrectly, the other scenario comes into play, and the engine will experience a catastrophic failure. No big deal, right? We just avoid that and we'll be perfectly fine. Our first task today is to measure the cylinder diameter. It's important that we do this first. If the cylinder is out of spec, it can't be used and our measurements wouldn't really come out right. We're currently using Class A cylinders, pistons, and conrods. That's the rod connected to the piston. These parts must match according to the Ducati manual. Class A cylinders measure 90 millimeters and Class A pistons measure 89.94 millimeters. If these two measurements are on the mark, we're good to move forward with using these parts. To measure cylinders, we're using a cylinder dial bore gauge. This unique tool will allow us to take measurements down the cylinder bore at multiple locations for better accuracy. We're checking to see if the cylinder is out of round or has any taper to its shape. Misshapen cylinders can create oil seal issues, which means we would not be able to achieve the desired pressure to run the engine. Now, what we're looking for here is our measurements to be as close to zero as possible, but it can be 0.0005 millimeters off, and we're very close to that in almost every measurement. So we can proceed with the checks for the piston ring gap with the cylinders measuring A-OK. This measurement is done by gently inserting each ring into the cylinder by hand. Then we push the ring down 3 times, measuring the ring gap at 3 different points. Once the ring is inserted, we can use our measuring shims to verify that the gap is large enough for the rings to sit nicely inside the cylinder. If the rings don't have a big enough end gap, they can butt against each other inside the cylinder and cause severe wall damage. With the dial bore measurements being so accurate before, we can be sure that what measurements we're getting with our rings is very accurate. And each level of our rings is showing that we are almost spot on with the amount of gap available to the rings. Now, they can't be too big or too small, so there is a range that they have to be in that you see it on the screen, and we're just about in the middle of each range. And it's a 0.8 limit, which is actually pretty big, which means even if the ring wears a little bit and it gets bigger and bigger at the end gap, that's going to be okay. It really becomes a problem when the ring gets tighter. If the ring somehow loosens and deforms and the end gap starts touching, like I said before, that can start to rub against the wall of the cylinder. So that's what we're completely avoiding here. Everything is amazing. We can move forward. Today was a success, and we have verified that the cylinders, pistons, and rings should all be usable in our Ducati 749 rebuild. This week's video should have been the bottom end rebuild, but we're currently stuck trying to install the flywheel that needs to be torqued down with 136 pounds. I tried to find a few shops locally that would help, but as expected, the major dealers said no go, and the smaller shops all said shove a penny in the gears. That was a no-go for me, not after the time we've put into this rebuild. We have a bunch of gaskets, crush washers, and other factory bits on the way from Italy that should get us through the rest of the build with no problem. It should be smooth sailing once we get the flywheel tool on Wednesday. We're also getting close to choosing the paint. It's not going to be the factory Ducati 749 dark matte black. It just doesn't do the bike lines any justice, and let's be serious. Ducatis are all about the lines. Here's a Ducati 749 Dark from the factory. And here's the one I purchased that had a pearl black paint job. The bike seems to stand out 10 times more. That just about wraps up another messy Moto Garage. Thank you as always for all the support. It's time to get some grub and refill my coffee. Until next time, Messy Moto out.